7. Kira Levitt. 30-year-old single mom Kira Levitt was visiting her friend with benefits in the English city of Sunderland one evening in December 2020 when they ran out of alcohol. Levitt's flame went to go buy more booze, but during his absence, she became convinced that the man had gone to meet another woman. Levitt was so overcome by jealousy that she set fire to her fling's shoes. The blaze quickly spread to the rest of his apartment, rendering the home uninhabitable. A pizza delivery man later told police that he saw a silhouette at the property during his first attempt to deliver a pizza at the residence. Nobody answered, and when he returned to the address a few minutes later, the apartment was on fire. The delivery man tried to extinguish the blaze while waiting for emergency responders to arrive. But he was unsuccessful, and the fire soon began to burn out of control. And by the time the victim arrived home 45 minutes after he left to go buy alcohol, it was far too late to save his home. Text messages that Levitt had sent to the man clearly showed that she was extremely angry and believed he was two-timing her. One message stated that it was the last time you try and mug me off, while another said, "Watch your house go up in flames." Levitt admitted to arson in court and was spared from prison thanks to the glowing character references provided by some of the people in her life. But it's likely safe to assume that the friends with benefits situation ended on the night of the fire. 6. James Hackam and Sama Baker. 30-year-old Sama Baker vanished into thin air just days into 2019. She was last seen by a friend who dropped her off at home in the Australian suburb of Parramatta outside Sydney. Baker's relatives reported her missing a few days later after they were unable to reach her. Suspicion quickly fell on 35-year-old James Hackam, Baker's on-again, off-again lover of more than 3 years. In fact, prosecutors were so convinced that he'd killed Baker, even before her body was found, that they went ahead and pursued a murder charge against the suspect. And by the time Baker's suspected remains were found near a highway overpass in July 2023, Hackam had been found guilty of her murder and had already started serving the minimum 18-year prison sentence that came along with his conviction. Although the outcome of the case marked a victory from a legal standpoint, Baker's family said that their grief had been compounded by the fact that her body hadn't yet been found. They finally received some semblance of closure in August 2023, when the remains that had been discovered the previous month were positively identified as Baker. 5. Cedric Brown. 31-year-old Cedric Brown and the woman he was dating weren't officially together, but they saw each other frequently. Brown's casual girlfriend admitted to this when she reported Brown to the police in West Palm Beach, Florida, for allegedly pointing a gun at her and threatening her. According to authorities, Brown became angry at his part-time lover because she wouldn't stop calling him. She told investigators that she was trying to reach Brown because he owed her more than $400 from her income tax refund, and she wanted her money, which is understandable. But every time she called and told Brown to pay her back, he allegedly hung up the phone, which only made the woman even more upset. A little while later, Brown allegedly entered the woman's home, threw his copy of the house key at her, and told her to quit calling his phone. The woman accused Brown of brandishing a gun and threatening to kill her and others who were in the home at the time. According to an arrest report, Brown's casual girlfriend feared for her life during that moment. Brown then allegedly put the gun away, grabbed the woman's phone, and repeatedly threw it against the floor until it broke. He was also accused of striking the woman in the head with his gun. Authorities charged Brown with armed burglary of a dwelling structure, robbery with a firearm, aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, and 2 counts of aggravated assault with intent to commit a felony. But that wasn't all. He was also charged with resisting an officer without violence and tampering with a witness or victim. 4. Stephanie Lazarus. Sherry Rasmussen was found beaten and shot to death in the Los Angeles apartment she shared with her husband of 3 months, John Rutan. According to reports, an intruder had fired 3 bullets into her chest at point-blank range. At first, detectives classified the murder as the product of a burglary gone wrong. But Sherry's father, Nels Rasmussen, was convinced that someone had murdered his daughter, and he refused to believe otherwise, even when the LAPD had no apparent interest in following up on any of his leads. But as he pushed detectives to investigate other possibilities, Nels mentioned that John Rutan's ex-girlfriend, Stephanie Lazarus, had been harassing Sherry in the months leading up to her death. Rutan and Lazarus had dated between 1981 and 1984, and they'd continue to see one another casually after Rutan began dating Rasmussen. But while Rutan saw the relationship as a strictly friends with benefits arrangement, Lazarus couldn't accept that she wasn't the number one woman in his life, or that he'd chosen someone else over her. Even after Rutan asked Lazarus to leave him alone, she kept coming around. At one point, she showed up at Rutan and Rasmussen's apartment when Sherry wasn't home and asked John to wax her skis. He begrudgingly complied, but had supposedly tried saying no and attempted to get Lazarus to go away. Despite the obvious motive that Lazarus would have for killing Sherry, the suggestion that she was involved in Sherry's murder wasn't well received by investigators, since Lazarus was an LAPD cop herself, and without the appropriate follow-up, the case soon went cold. Nels even tried to obtain DNA evidence for testing at some point after his daughter's death, but the items he turned over to the police conveniently turned up missing. The lost evidence was found several years later in 2001, but Lazarus continued to fly under the radar until 2009, when a keen-eyed detective thoroughly reviewed the case file. DNA evidence tied Lazarus to the crime scene, and what started out as a normal workday for the art theft detective ended with her in custody as the prime suspect in Sherry's murder. According to prosecutors, Lazarus lost her mind and began wreaking havoc on Rutan and Rasmussen's lives after finding out that they planned to get married. The state further accused Lazarus of being enraged that she was nothing more than a fling to Rutan, and that he saw Sherry as worthy of marrying. In the end, she was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. 3. Theodore Pundi. In early 2023, an unarmed man named Chad Jensen was mercilessly gunned down at a Las Vegas trailer park by the boyfriend of a woman he'd been dating casually. According to reports, 38-year-old Theodore Pundi and the woman, Tiffany Swiderski, had been in a 12-year relationship and had 3 kids together. In 2022, the couple took a 2-month break, during which time Swiderski dated Jensen. When she and Pundi got back together, though, she stopped seeing Jensen. But Pundi apparently couldn't let go of his anger and jealousy over the situation. After eating dinner together one evening in January, Pundi and Swiderski went home to the trailer park they were living in at the time. As Swiderski entered the code to open the gate surrounding the community, Jensen pulled up in his car, exited the vehicle, and began yelling obscenities. Pundi allegedly punched Jensen in the face before shooting at him 5 times. Jensen managed to get back into his car, but lost control of the vehicle and drove into the park's landscaping before succumbing to his injuries. As police descended upon the scene, Pundi apparently realized it was too late to flee, so he peacefully surrendered to law enforcement and reportedly confessed to shooting Jensen, stating that he just snapped. He further added that maybe deep down he wanted to shoot the guy, and after questioning, Pundi also allegedly admitted to having prior verbal altercations with the victim, claiming that Jensen had been extremely aggressive and had even called him a bad father. Pundi was booked into custody on suspicion of murder, but for now, the case appears to be ongoing. 2. James Flanders and Mary Carlson. When Jeff Carlson was unable to reach his ex-wife, 37-year-old Mary Carlson, in 2011, he became concerned and reported her missing to law enforcement. Investigators soon discovered that Mary's family members had recently received a cryptic text message from her stating that she was leaving her home in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, to do something she had always wanted to do. It was the last they ever heard from her, and they had no idea where she'd gone. Mary's loved ones were especially concerned because she'd left behind an 8-year-old child who she shared with her ex, Jeff, as well as an infant who was fathered by James Flanders, a married preacher she'd been living with at the time of her disappearance. While Mary had always been a free spirit, her relatives knew that she'd never deliberately pull a disappearing act, and she'd definitely never abandon her kids. They became even more worried when Mary's car was found abandoned at a local airport. James Flanders and his wife Tanya had taken Mary into their home after she escaped an abusive relationship. The trio soon became intimate with each other and began living somewhat as a throuple, and Mary eventually ended up getting pregnant. Naturally, jealousy often ends up becoming a factor in these types of relationships, and detectives questioned whether James and Tanya Flanders had anything to do with Mary's disappearance. But they didn't have enough information to make any arrests, and so the case went cold for 4 years. A break finally came in 2015, though, when parishioners from the church that James Flanders used to preach at began to come forward with bits and pieces of the truth. Several witnesses reported that James and Mary had had a disagreement on the day she was last seen alive, and that James had spent several days hospitalized due to his distressed mental state after Mary went missing. A review of old cell phone records revealed that Mary's phone had never left Fort Walton Beach, as her text messages to her loved ones had indicated. This led investigators to suspect that whoever killed her had sent the messages in an effort to mislead the people in Mary's life. By the time authorities finally arrested James Flanders in 2015, he'd left Florida and was living in Arizona. But he apparently realized that the gig was up and confessed to fatally choking Mary, whose remains were found buried in James and Tanya's old backyard in Fort Walton Beach. Prosecutors charged James with second-degree murder, and he was extradited to Florida to finally face justice for his actions. Then, in April 2016, he pleaded guilty to a reduced manslaughter charge and was sentenced to 15 years in prison, rather than the life term he would have faced if he'd been convicted as charged. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Jesse Valencia and Stephen Rios. Life was just starting out for Jesse Valencia when he began attending classes at the University of Missouri in the early 2000s. As a young gay man from a conservative town in Kentucky, he enjoyed the more accepting and open-minded culture of his new town, Columbia. It enabled Valencia to not only be himself, but to openly date around and have casual relationships. But something went terribly wrong, and in June 2004, the 23-year-old was found brutally murdered between 2 campus buildings. Someone had cut his throat so deeply with a serrated knife that the blade had scraped against his spine. There was also heavy bruising to Valencia's chest and upper back. The medical examiner concluded that he'd likely been choked or strangled and was probably unconscious by the time his throat was cut. But the young man's death was nevertheless gruesome and horrifying. After taking a second look at Valencia's body later on in the case, the coroner determined that whoever killed the young man had used a specialized chokehold that's normally only known by police and self-defense experts. While piecing together Valencia's last known steps, investigators learned that he'd left his shift at a motel where he worked and drank at a campus party. He was found several hours later by some students who were living in the area, and a neighbor later told police that they heard banging and other loud noises coming from Valencia's apartment during the early morning hours. The case came to a standstill for a period before an anonymous tip pointed police in the direction of one of their own. According to the tipster, Valencia was involved in a physical relationship with a member of the police force. And based on the information given by the informant, a different friend of Valencia's was invited down to the police station, where he was shown photos of various officers and was able to point out the alleged friend with benefits. As it turned out, Valencia had been hooking up with a married cop named Stephen Rios. According to sources, the 2 men met 2 months earlier when Rios broke up a party that Valencia was at. And on at least one occasion, one of Valencia's other partners joined the men for an intimate romp. Rios admitted to the affair, but denied having any involvement in Valencia's murder. He was institutionalized twice at a psychiatric hospital before finally going on trial. According to prosecutors, Valencia had found out that Rios was married and had a family of his own, and tried to end the affair. But Rios was allegedly overcome with rage and afraid that Valencia was going to reveal their relationship to his wife when he made the fateful decision to murder the victim. The jury convicted Rios of first-degree murder, but he won a retrial and was convicted of a reduced second-degree murder charge. He was nevertheless sentenced to life in prison plus 23 years for an additional armed criminal action conviction. 9. Kila Volcano. In early 2022, an elderly man from Hilo, Hawaii fell to his death after losing his footing on a platform above the Kilauea volcano. Hawaii Volcano's National Park Rangers and country firefighters searched in the pitch dark for the man after his family members reported him missing. The victim was a 75-year-old male, but his name was never released to the public. He apparently fell 100 feet, 30 meters, after going over the side of a viewing platform that was situated above the Kilauea volcano, which is located on Hawaii's Big Island. The man's body was eventually found below the viewing area's crater rim, and a helicopter was called in order to help retrieve his body. Afterward, an investigation into the matter was launched by the National Park Service, NPS. In a statement, the NPS explained that the volcano had erupted in September 2021, and ever since then, local residents and tourists have been visiting the park at night, so they can try to catch a glimpse of a glowing lava lake. The eruption supposedly caused significant hazards, including rockfalls, high volcanic gas levels that create airborne health risks, and volcanic glass fragments. Unfortunately, not much else is known about this tragic incident, but hopefully the family of the victim found peace in knowing that he's now at rest. 8. Too much water. In January 2008, an inquest heard how a 35-year-old man from Milton Keynes, England, died after consuming too much water. After downing a massive amount of water, Sean McNamara was found on the floor of his bathroom. Initially, it was believed that he'd suffered a heart attack. However, a post-mortem autopsy revealed that he'd swallowed so much fluid in a short amount of time that his brain swelled up as a result. This ultimately led to Sean's untimely demise, and his cause of death was determined to be water intoxication. A fairly unusual cause, which has a very low number of recorded cases, and is often linked to marathon runners who drink too much water after a race. The same incident apparently happened in April 2007, when a 22-year-old fitness instructor named David Rogers, who was also from Milton Keynes, passed away from water intoxication after completing his very first London Marathon. During the inquest for Sean McNamara, Dr. Ian Reid, the man who carried out the post-mortem autopsy, said that in his 35 years of being a pathologist, he'd never come across such a case. He explained that excessive consumption of water might be associated with a person suffering from psychological issues. Sean's devastated mother, Gillian, described to the inquest how her son had a lengthy history of anxiety and depression, and that he'd been admitted to the hospital after having an overdose in 2005, something that she considered a cry for help. However, the officers that discovered Sean's body at his house in York found no clear signs of self-harm or any indication that the man wanted to end his own life. While recording Sean's verdict of accidental death, Coroner Donald Coverdale said that the case was rather unusual and that the man's consumption of excessive amounts of water may have gone unnoticed by those around him. He also stated that if Sean had instead consumed a large amount of alcohol, his strange behavior may have been perceived. But because it was water, nobody knew what signs to look out for. 7. Hunting trip. In January 2023, a man from Wichita, Kansas was tragically killed during a hunting trip after his dog accidentally shot him. 30-year-old Joseph Austin Smith was reportedly sitting in the passenger seat of a truck when he was fatally shot in the back. According to a statement that was released by the Sumner County Sheriff's Office, the back seat contained a rifle and hunting gear. And apparently, a dog belonging to the owner of the truck accidentally stepped on the rifle, causing the weapon to fire. The bullet that was discharged from the gun unfortunately struck Joseph, who passed away at the scene from his injuries. Based on reports from the local sheriff's office, Joseph was killed instantly. And while foul play may have been considered a possibility in the case at first, it's since been ruled out. In the end, the man's death was labeled an accidental shooting, and the investigation into the incident has been closed. And while this may be the first time you're hearing of an instance where a dog was responsible for shooting someone, it's happened before. One example of this occurred back in 2018, when a pit bull Labrador named Balu accidentally shot a gun that struck his owner in the leg. They'd been playing outside their home in Iowa when the firearm discharged. Another similar case occurred in 2015 when a pooch ironically named Trigger shot his owner in the foot after she'd left a shotgun on the ground without putting the safety on. Joseph was a plumber employed by Brown's Plumbing Services. And after finding out about the tragic incident, his boss, Chris Brown, no, not the rapper, created a GoFundMe page in order to help the man's family with memorial and funeral costs. The fundraising page has already met its goal of $20,000, even surpassing it by $2,740. And while the money can't bring Joseph back, it likely helped put his family at ease since they didn't have to pay out of pocket for the man's sudden and tragic accidental death. 6. MRI, oh my. In Sao Paulo, Brazil, a lawyer was tragically killed when his firearm was discharged at a hospital by an MRI machine's magnetic field on January 16, 2023. According to Jam Press, the gun-loving victim, who's been identified as Leandro Matthias de Novas, was taking his mom to get scanned at the Laboratorio Cura. It wasn't known by the hospital staff that the man was carrying a registered gun on his person, as Leandro believed the rules didn't apply to him because he wasn't the one getting the MRI. When staff asked the pair to remove all the metal objects they had on them, Leandro ignored their warnings and continued to hide the gun on his person. Removing all metal from an MRI room is protocol at hospitals because the machines create an extremely powerful magnetic field. But Leandro didn't seem to be aware of the dangers the machine posed. And he didn't think too much about it because he wasn't the one getting the scan. This decision, of course, had fatal consequences. When the MRI machine was powered up, it pulled the weapon from the man's waistband, causing the firearm to go off. The bullets that were fired struck the lawyer in the stomach and inflicted serious damage. He was rushed to the São Luís Morumbi Hospital to be treated for his injuries, where he barely held on for weeks, but eventually succumbed to his wounds on February 6, 2023. After the incident, a statement was released by the facility's PR team, claiming that both Leandro and his mother signed a form regarding the MRI protocols, but that the gun enthusiast failed to mention his weapon and entered the unit with it on his own accord. Before his passing, Leandro posted pro-gun content frequently to TikTok, where he'd amassed over 8,000 followers. 5. Crushed by Denny sign. In early 2023, a married couple was killed in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, after a sign from a Denny's restaurant fell onto their car during a wind advisory. 72-year-old Lillian Curtis and her husband, 77-year-old Lloyd Eugene Curtis Sr., passed away from blunt force injuries that they sustained when the heavy sign fell onto their vehicle, according to spokesperson Dan Alpiger from the coroner's office in Jefferson County. The sign apparently crushed the couple's car after it fell from a pole near the establishment's parking lot, located about 45 miles, 72.4 kilometers south of Louisville. Mary Graham, Lillian and Lloyd's daughter, was driving at the time of the incident and was also injured. Luckily though, she was released from the hospital after getting treated for chest wounds. Amy Nichols, the pair's granddaughter, told local news outlets that Lillian suffered a catastrophic head wound, and that Lloyd sustained similar injuries. As reported by the National Weather Service in Louisville, a wind advisory had been in effect on the day of the accident, with peak wind gusts reaching 45 to 55 miles per hour, 72.4 to 88.5 kilometers per hour. The couple, who'd been together for more than 50 years, had been on their way to Colombia with their daughter when the sign fell onto their vehicle. Lloyd underwent major heart surgery just a few days prior, and the family had just picked him up from the hospital. Amy Nichols told the Courier-Journal that her grandparents were basically the glue that held her family together, and that their passing was absolutely devastating. She described Lloyd and Lillian as the most loving, compassionate, understanding, wholehearted people in the world, and she said she felt blessed to have been the couple's granddaughter. 4. McDonald's Accident. A 42-year-old father of two was killed in a freak accident at the drive-thru window of a McDonald's restaurant in Vancouver, Canada in late 2021. When Tony Ailes arrived at the fast food joint at around 5:30 a.m., he planned to grab his meal quickly and then head to work. However, he dropped his bank card as he attempted to pay for his food, which forced him to get out of the vehicle to retrieve it. When he did this, though, he forgot to put his car in park, ultimately resulting in him getting pinned against the side of the building. According to News 1130 Radio, as Tony was picking up his bank card, his vehicle rolled forward directly into him, crushing him to death against the McDonald's restaurant. Unfortunately, Tony died just a few weeks before his 9th wedding anniversary, leaving behind his beloved son and daughter, aged 8 and 6. His wife was extremely distraught by his passing, and so too was the man's brother-in-law, Neil Pender, who told the station that Tony was the perfect dad and the perfect husband. After the tragic incident, 2 fundraisers were created in order to help the man's family in the wake of his death. In just a short amount of time, they raised over $100,000 from roughly 800 donors. Although what happened seemed to be a horrific accident, an investigation into the matter was launched by the British Columbia's coroner's office. However, there haven't been any updates on the case since 2021. 3. Kiawa Island Gator. 58-year-old Cynthia Covert died on Kiawa Island in South Carolina in May 2020 after attempting to get close and personal with an alligator. The woman was visiting a pond with one of her friends when the pair noticed the gator in the water. She apparently wanted to get a better look at the animal, even though her pal advised her not to. In the end, though, she did what she wanted, and she paid the ultimate price for her decision. The alligator was put down by a deputy in order to try and get Cynthia away from the creature. According to the official police report, the woman's friend yelled for her not to get any closer to the gator, but she continued to advance toward it. When she was about 4 feet, 1.2 meters from the animal, it lunged at her and grabbed her in its jaws. Based on witness testimonies, Cynthia didn't make a sound as the alligator pulled her into the water. The woman's husband and another man attempted to beat the animal with shovels, but the gator just swam deeper into the pond. When deputies arrived at the scene, the creature kept surfacing with Cynthia and going under. Luckily, as it was doing this, an officer managed to shoot it as it surfaced again. The woman was pulled out of the water by firefighters who used poles to lift her. And while she initially survived the attack, she later passed away from her injuries at the hospital. Her official cause of death was drowning. 2. Hot dog eating contest. A college lacrosse player choked and died during a hot dog eating contest for charity in Somerville, Massachusetts in October 2021. Madeline Nickpon, a 20-year-old attending Tufts University in Boston, participated in the contest with several other college students at an off-campus residence. Based on reports from the Rockland Westchester Journal News, As she was eating the hot dogs, she started to choke and eventually fell unconscious. The outlet reported that she later died at Massachusetts General Hospital. Madeline was originally from Suffern, New York, and she loved to play lacrosse. She was also studying biopsychology at the time of her death. Thousands of faculty, students, and staff gathered together for the young woman's vigil that was hosted by the university's lacrosse team. Madeline's teammates were completely heartbroken to hear of her passing, and in an Instagram post, they said they will miss her every day. In order to help cover the costs of Madeline's medical and funeral costs, a GoFundMe page earned more than $162,000 for her family. 1. After-hours water slide. In the summer of 2020, a man from Arizona decided to sneak into a water park after closing, which he thought would be a fun adventure. But after he got stuck on a water slide, things took a devastating turn for the worse. 31-year-old Ryan Kelly snuck into a closed aquatic center in Scottsdale, purportedly to beat the summer heat. He was believed to be a transient and likely had nothing to lose by breaking into the water park. But when an officer patrolled the area surrounding the aquatic and fitness center, he believed he heard muffled cries for help and started to investigate. Ryan was later discovered trapped inside one of the park's water slides, which amplified his cries, making it easier to hear him. Emergency responders were immediately called to the scene to try and free the man. They conversed with Ryan for about an hour, but eventually he stopped answering them. This was when things turned from a rescue to a recovery mission. Officer Kevin Watts reported to azfamily.com that Ryan had crawled inside a water slide pipe that was part of the superstructure. And in order to free him, the whole thing had to be dismantled. It isn't clear from the police report how exactly the man got stuck, but he unfortunately paid the price for his actions with his life. Would you rather be completely single for 5 years straight, with absolutely no physical or romantic involvement with anyone? Or end up in several friends with benefits situations that kept your loneliness at bay, but all ended in hurt feelings? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!